The epicenter of this entire argument between king and countryman, the State House or the Legislative House. Occasionally I make the mistake and I say the old State House, which they wouldn't have called it since it would have been the State House, or the colonial legislature. This is where everything happened. Now the king is in a bit of political trouble. He's not going to get fired. You can't fire the king, but his government is being questioned for its actions. So he cancels the stamp tax, and he moves the soldiers out of Boston to Castle Island, right out there in Boston Harbor. And things seem to calm down. On the king's part, actually, it's a good move politically, because now, as he sees it, he never quite gets what the colonists are getting at. He never quite understands it's a debate about power, and maybe our founding fathers are at fault for this, because they never really say, you're taking our power. They say you need to use our legislature. They're never really clear, well, because what man would? What man would say, well, hey, you're not making me as powerful as I used to be, give it some of it back. So maybe the language didn't quite work out, I'm not sure. But the king doesn't quite grasp the issue. He thinks it's about the flat nature of the tax, that everybody has to pay it, so he eliminates that. But he still has to pay the bills. So he starts a series of different taxes. And the tax thing waxes and wanes. And most of the taxes are going to land exactly where most people think they should land, on the wealthy. Most of the things taxed are raw materials. Not all, but most. Examples: glass is taxed. Paint is taxed. The pigment that goes into paint to make it a different color is taxed. Iron is taxed. Molasses is taxed. All this different stuff is taxed. So it goes back and forth. And the wealthy fight the tax wherever they can. In other words, they boycott certain things. They try to bypass tax collectors. They look for loopholes, just like they would today. But these loopholes are kind of on the edge of the law, you might say. So the king is always struggling for an answer. And he thinks he's found it, because he's been back and forth in a number of small wars. He has the opportunity to strengthen an act that talks a lot about piracy. And what he does in this act, he slides a couple of paragraphs in there that say that tax collectors can now audit the books of people, of businesses, to see if they've been skipping out on their taxes. Because if they have, he's saying this supports piracy. They're giving money to pirates instead of the king. That's treasonous. It's a good idea. It works, because guys like John Hancock, who's a great smuggler, wasn't always, but he wants to keep his business active. He would have a ship sailing towards Boston, stop at some beach somewhere, and he'd offload half the molasses. And the rest would arrive here, and he would buy that and pay the taxes on that half. Well, the tax guy, could audit his books and say, well, gee, John, how is it you were able to make the same amount of powerful rum this month with half the amount of molasses? I think you're cheating on your taxes. You have to pay up. And like all good rich people, Hancock would say, prove it. Take me to court. And so the tax collector would. Well, where was that court? Right there. Who sat on that court? The same people John Hancock elected. That's power. That's what he's talking about. They never found him guilty. And so the king once again tightens the act up a little bit, and now he has made tax evasion linked directly to the Piracy Act in such a way that if you are accused of it, you will be tried in an admiralty court, not a colonial court. This means you'll be put on a boat. If you're lucky, you'll go to Halifax, Nova Scotia. More likely, you will go to London, where a British admiral will say you are guilty, take all of your property from you, and throw you into a poorhouse, and you will never see anything again. And the law was passed. To the English, this is fine. This makes perfect sense. It's stopping piracy and smuggling and giving money to people who oppose the king. To guys like John Hancock, it is devastating. He could lose everything, or he has to pay the tax and lose his access to power. Now the poor, the mob, they don't seem too concerned about this. This really doesn't affect them that much because they're not paying the tax. And now the king, sensing a little victory, decides to pile on. He tells the middle class and the poor, he goes, I've got an idea, because I've been so mean lately, I'm going to help you guys out. I am going to assume the responsibility of paying all colonial governments. So I will pay the legislature instead of you being taxed to pay the legislature. Now he's trying to drive a wedge between the rich and the middle class, right? You don't have to pay this tax anymore. Even the rich don't have to pay it. I'll pay it out of my own coffers. Now, to us, you're thinking, yeah, I don't have to pay the tax. This is great. But to the people who elect those people and use their power to get what they want out of those people, politics, right? This is the death blow. Because to collect your paycheck from the King of England, you had to sign an oath of loyalty. And just to drive his point home, after he passes this act and he eliminates this tax, he puts his royal symbols on top of a colonial state house, a legislative building, saying, now look who's in control. It's kind of a smack in the face. It's a very powerful message he's sending. And he's done exactly, if I were a politician, what I would do. He's driven a wedge between the people who are making an argument against me. He's put a wedge in there. They have to react. But it's very hard. They can't smuggle anymore. They can under a tremendous amount of danger. Their protest is falling on deaf ears because the poor aren't being taxed as much or as often. So they turn to the last weapon they can control, the local economy. They tell the poor, gee, we're really sorry, but because of the king's taxes, I can no longer afford to make rum. You're all fired. I can't make any more rope. You're all fired. Whatever. No more ships. They essentially started shuttering the economy. Not to punish the king, but to tell the poor, we are who you have to go through. This is the result of the king's policy. They were trying to outmaneuver the king by punishing the poor, by shutting down businesses and impoverishing them further. So this debate is swirling around and around and around. The king is constantly trying to checkmate the colonists. The colonists are constantly trying to checkmate the king, but neither can quite get around the other. And what's going to really pull it all together? What's going to help the colonists make this argument work isn't going to be an idea by Samuel Adams or his third cousin John Adams, or even a political economic move by the rich like John Hancock. It's going to come from a Virginia planter. And we'll talk about that at our next stop. We're going to go up here, take a left, walk down.